Hello everyone, welcome to Brain Blitz Audios. We all know that Earth is our home and it's our duty to protect it. But have you ever realized what we should protect or where are the species that we see live? Today in this episode we'll be dealing with the diverse planet that's Earth and the various habitats that exist on Earth. Our Earth is the third planet from the Sun. It is right now the only astronomical object known to have life. It was formed over 4.5 billion years ago when the planets were formed around the Sun in the solar system. The distance from the Sun is 1496,000,000 kilometers. So as you can see, it is far from the Sun, but it has just the right distance to harbor life. It's not too hot or too cold. When it comes to species living on Earth, they live in areas called habitats. There are 8 global habitats that cover the vast areas of the Earth. Hello Earth! Next, we look at habitats. A habitat is basically a type of natural environment in which a particular species of organism lives. A species habitat is those places where the species can find food, where it can find shelter, protection, and also others of its kind, such as mates for reproduction. Habitats are mainly dictated by physical and biological factors, and because of these factors, there are 8 different types of habitats. Today we'll be looking at biological factors, types of habitats, but more importantly, we'll also be looking at physical factors. Moving on. There are basically 5 physical factors for a habitat: temperature, humidity, climate, soil, light intensity. Temperature. Temperature is an important aspect of a habitat. It dictates whether animals live there or not. If a habitat's temperature is too hot, then it does not support animal or plant life. If it's too cold, then it's also difficult for animals and plants to live. Temperature of a habitat is just right for organisms to grow, although some organisms can adapt to both cold and hot temperatures. Next, humidity. Humidity is basically the amount of air that is in the atmosphere. When you have too much humidity, you get rain, and rainfall is essential as the source of water for all animals and plants on Earth. So therefore, areas with high humidity also support more life compared to areas with less humidity. Next, the climate. Earth is special in that it has a variety of climates all over it. There are basically cold climates and hot climates, and also temperate ones in between them. So the climate of a place greatly determines the type of organisms that live there. Animals which can survive on more than one climate basically can survive everywhere. Other species can only survive on a single climate, and that too sometimes only in a specific place. Next, we have soil. Soil is an important aspect of a habitat. It's through the soil that plants get their nutrients and water, and also it's the habitat for microorganisms. Basically, worms, and then fungi, and also bacteria, viruses, and other protozoans, etc. So they live in the soil, and they enhance the diversity of the soil. So soil is also an important aspect of a habitat. If a habitat, say the tundra, has no soil at all, then you won't find many creatures living there. Finally, we have light intensity. The light that reaches the Earth is different in different parts. For example, the equator gets more light than the poles. So therefore, there's more life at the equator than, say, at the poles. So that's how light intensity is very important, because light from the sun is what powers the entire system. It powers the plants, it powers the animals, it also powers natural phenomena and weather. Next, we look at biological factors. When we're looking at biological factors, we're essentially looking at the organisms, the types of organisms present in a habitat. So these are broadly classified into 3 types: producers, consumers, and decomposers. Now, we told you that the sun is the important source of energy. But how does this energy gets converted? Well, that is the job for the producers, plants, fungi, etc. Now, they capture the sunlight and then they transform it into edible energy, basically food. Now this excess energy, which is stored as food, can either be utilized by the plants or they're utilized by consumers. Consumers are organisms which feed on something else in order to sustain themselves. For example, herbivores like the pronghorn, they are dependent on plants, so therefore they're primary consumers. And animals such as cheetah, they are dependent on other animals in order to get their energy, so they are known as secondary consumers. Now, through the cycle, we know how primary and secondary consumers work. But what happens if they die of natural causes? Then they become food for decomposers. Decomposers such as fungi and microorganisms that live in the soil, they derive food from dead and decaying stuff. And then they convert it into soil, and which has a lot of manure and which has a lot of nutrients. Now this soil is beneficial for the growth of more producers because they get more nutrients out of the soil. So therefore, these are the three factors that are important for an ecosystem. The three biological factors for a habitat include the amount of producers it has, the amount of consumers it has, and also the amount of decomposers that it has. Now that we've discussed the physical and biological factors that govern a habitat, let's look at the types of habitat themselves. Basically, on the Earth, there are 8 main kinds of habitats. Let's look into each one by one. Starting from the extreme ends, we have the polar habitats. These are formed at the highest latitudes on Earth, and they receive very little energy from the sun in the summer and virtually none in the winter. These are the similarities. But what differences can you find between the North and the South Pole? The main difference is that the North Pole is a sea surrounded by icy land, while the South Pole is basically the continent of Antarctica, which is frozen solid, surrounded by oceans. So it's basically the presence of land and water that's the main difference. In terms of species variation, in the South Pole you can find enormous colonies of penguins. You can also find leopard seals, whales, etc. find offshore. These animals, they eat fish, and they also eat microorganisms called krill. These are small crustaceans which eat plankton, which are the producers in the oceans. In the North Pole, the same plankton gets eaten by small fish, which are then eaten by larger predators such as narwhals, walruses, and above all, the polar bears. So you can see a polar bear living in the north and a penguin, a colony of penguins, living in the south. Moving on, the next habitat is the tundra. Now you can think of tundras as part of the polar habitat, but they're not covered in ice, so they're very different. The Arctic tundra, it's found in the far northern hemisphere, and it has a latitude of 71.2 degrees north and 156 degrees west. Now, the beauty about the tundra is that for the winter, it is covered in snow and it looks lifeless. But in the summer months, the snow melts and reveals a vast area of grassy meadows and small shrubs, which are quick growing. Another speciality about the tundra is that the growing season here is very short for trees to grow. When you're talking about the fauna which lives in tundras, the primary consumers include reindeer, caribou, etc. And the secondary consumers, the predators, include wolves, foxes, and others. So as you can see, this is how the tundra looks during the spring. The snow is melting, revealing the area which is covered by small shrubs, which derive their energy from the sun. And the Arctic wolves, the pristine predators of the Arctic tundra, feeding on primary consumers such as reindeer and caribou. Next, we have the evergreen forests. They are just outside the North Pole and the Arctic Circle, and they encircle it. They encircle the North Pole around the Earth. So they are stretching all the way across Canada, Northern Europe, and Russia. So these are the areas where you can find evergreen forests. Their latitude is basically 50 degrees to 60 degrees north. There are more trees in this habitat than in any other habitat in the world. Now, by more trees, I mean the extreme number of trees that are present. There are more number of trees per area than any other in the world. And most of these trees are basically conifers, adapted to survive the extreme cold winters. The beauty about conifers is that they're needle leaves, it doesn't lose water to the dry air, and they contain thick resin that prevents the tree from freezing. So a conifer forest looks like this. The disadvantage with this kind of leaves is that conifer leaves are almost inedible. So primary consumers here must eat the seeds provided by pine cones, or they must eat the soft leaves of conifers or the grasses. Now, the primary consumers here include the snowshoe hare. They survive winters by burrowing underground and eating the soft stems, while predators such as the Canada lynx eat the snowshoe hare. So this is a Canada lynx in the north, which attacks the snowshoe hare for its food. Next, we have seasonal forests. Now, these forests are found around the world wherever we see conditions that are not extremely cold, extremely dry, extremely hot, or extremely wet. So these are the middle kind of habitat. So they require conditions where it's just perfect. The temperature is perfect and the humidity is also intermediate. Trees in these areas are sometimes conifers, but most of the trees are deciduous. That's why these are called deciduous forests. These trees contain broad, flat, sun-catching leaves. The disadvantage is that these leaves must be dropped every winter to protect the tree from drying out. So they shed their leaves every year. Due to the extremely variable nature of weather conditions, plants and animals need to be able to survive in both warm and cold conditions, summers and winters. Deciduous leaves are great food sources for large mammals, and large consumers such as deer are common in seasonal forests. Some of the top predators include owls and tigers. Owls eat a variety of prey ranging from fish, frogs, mice, rabbits, insects, snakes, and even other smaller birds. So some of the primary consumers here include deer. Many species of deer live in the seasonal forests. Another primary consumer is the sloth bear. We have some amazing predators in these forests, such as the magnificent tiger, and also owls. Owls are one of the top predators in this habitat. When we look at forests, the first picture that comes into our mind is that of the jungle, the tropical rainforest. Tropical rainforests have the perfect conditions to support plants on land. They're warm, they're bright, and they're wet. They form near the equator where sunlight is most plentiful and only in places that receive regular, almost daily rains. So they require a lot of sunlight, a lot of heat, and also a lot of rain. The largest continuous forest is the Amazon in South America, and other large rainforests includes the Congo. There are rainforests on islands around the world, such as the Indo-Pacific, Borneo, New Guinea, Indonesia, etc. So as you can see, there is a variety of life here. In terms of variety of species, tropical rainforests are the kings of habitats. They basically contain more than 50% of all the species on Earth. These forests are the most biologically diverse places, and the plants they grow so thick that very little light reaches the ground's surface. Plants must compete for their share of canopy space in order to get the maximum sunlight. Soft leaves and fruit can be found everywhere in the trees, so herbivores, they do not need to come down. Most of them, they live on the tree canopies. Animals, many of them have found ways to travel from one treetop to the next without traveling across the ground. The colugo, or flying lemur for instance, glides across the canopy through its membranous structure. Frogs, they jump from branch to branch, and they also live on the branches. And predators like the fossa also live on the treetops, attacking organisms such as the lemurs. Next, we have grasslands. Grasslands grow under conditions that are warm enough to support plant life, but grasslands are too dry for trees to grow. However, a grassland is not too dry that a desert forms in its place. The important parts of a grass plant are found below the soil surface. So grass has a part of the stem which is actually below the surface. So therefore, the soil protects the grass systems from extreme conditions such as heat, cold, or dryness. Grasslands, they can survive massive fires and severe grazing from large herds of grassland animals. We have bison in North America and wild horses in Asia who are massive grazers. And the thing about grasslands is that in terms of fauna, grasslands support the largest collection of mammals on Earth. Places such as the African savanna, the steppes in Russia, the prairies in North America, and the pampas in South America, they contain a lot of mammals living in it. Some of them include lions, hyenas, and crocodiles. As you can see, you find giraffes on the savanna. You also find the kings of the jungle, the lions, in the savanna. You also find crocodiles in the rivers lining the grasslands looking for food, and also grazers such as the magnificent bison in the prairies of North America. What happens if the area, the habitat, gets too dry for plants to grow? You get deserts. Deserts are formed in the driest places on Earth. When you're talking about deserts, most of us think of hot deserts, such as the Sahara or the Atacama. However, there are cold deserts also, areas that are very cold and also dry, such as the Gobi in western China and the continent of Antarctica. Water is absolutely essential to life as we know it. So therefore, plants and animals in deserts must survive by getting on minimal quantities of liquid water. Plants adapted to these areas include succulents such as cacti. Now, they have extensive roots branching out in all directions close to the surface. So whenever it rains in a desert, perhaps maybe once a year, the roots absorb tons of water into the plant, which allows it to survive until the next rain. This is the condition in both hot deserts, like the Sahara, and cold deserts, as in Antarctica. Now, the reason why we call Antarctica desert is that it rarely snows out here. The ice here is mostly dry. The snow here is also dry, so therefore there's less water. Plants such as succulents, as you can see in the picture, you can see succulents such as the saguaro cactus living in the desert by branching out their roots and sucking up water whenever it falls. Animals in this area must be equally careful as in how they ration water. Some of the insects, they get all the water they need by eating the wet tissues of plants. Desert animals like the fennec fox are only active at night when the air is less dry and temperatures are less extreme. Reptiles, however, are well adapted to these habitats due to their scaly skin having excellent water retention abilities. Some desert reptiles include sidewinder snakes. This is a fennec fox coming out in the evenings, a sidewinder snake hiding under the sands, and also the ships of the desert, camels. Camels, they store fat in their humps, which when catalyzed gives them water. So both the dromedary and the Bactrian live in deserts. The Bactrian in the cold deserts of the Gobi, while the dromedary in the hot deserts of the Earth. The last kind of habitat, and the biggest kind of habitat, is ocean. Oceans cover most of the surface of the Earth, and they're the largest habitat due to their depth and width. Plants growing in the surface waters have plenty of sunlight and unlimited water, but their growth is limited by the availability of minerals. Free-swimming algae and plankton make up the vast majority of biomass found on the ocean. Herbivorous animals in the ocean, they filter feed on microscopic plants, and predators, they swim the ocean in search of prey. Out in the oceans, prey do not often have places to hide, so therefore they must form massive schools for protection. Some plants which grow in the ocean include seaweed and algae. This is a manatee, which is a primary consumer living inside the oceans. Some species in the ocean can only be found in certain locations, such as nearby coasts, deep waters, or other habitat. Others are adapted such that they can be found in any ocean environment. Examples include starfish. Shallow and coastal waters tend to support more species of plants that need to root in the seabed and receive sunlight. The water in shallow regions tends to have more nutrients suspended in the water. Now this promotes the growth of plants, and animals can more easily find shelter and food in these rich ecosystems. Deeper organisms, such as ones living in the ocean floor, find sustenance either by scavenging on dead bodies, or find their sustenance by feeding on bacteria near the volcanic vents, such as this one here. Here the volcanic vents, they spew out bacteria, they spew out chemicals. These chemicals are home to bacteria, and these organisms, they eat on bacteria, the organisms that live in the volcanic vents. And up in the surface, you have prey forming schools and predators such as dolphins forming hordes in order to feed on the prey. These are the 8 kinds of habitats present on the Earth. But do you think all these habitats are in their pristine condition? I don't think so. Habitat conservation for wildlife species is one of the most important issues facing the environment today, both on land and in the open ocean. As human populations increase, land use increases, and wild species have smaller spaces to call home. More than half of the Earth's terrestrial surface has been altered due to human activity, resulting in problems such as drastic deforestation, erosion and loss of topsoil, loss of biodiversity, and even extinctions of some species. Species cannot survive outside of their natural habitat without human intervention, such as the habitats you find in a zoo, a park, or an aquarium. This is the scale of the problem. As you can see, our intervention is causing less biodiversity, as biodiversity is getting lost due to human activities. Preserving habitats is essential to preserving biodiversity. Migratory species are particularly vulnerable to habitat destructions because they tend to inhabit more than one natural habitat. This creates the need to not only preserve the 2 habitats for migratory species, but also their migratory route. The problem of migratory species exhibits the important fact that altering a natural habitat, even slightly, can result in a domino effect that harms the entire ecosystem. Problems such as pollution exist across all kinds of habitat, whether it be on land or in the air or under the sea. We have some solutions which we can use in order to protect habitats. We can define protected areas for pristine wildlife to survive. We can also control land use and development regulations in order to avoid exploiting the wildlife and nature around us. We should also monitor and report on pollution such that we can cut back on pollution levels and eventually someday be non-pollutant. We can also introduce zoning of areas and also the underwater in order to preserve species. These are some solutions that we think can protect our habitat and make it a better place to live. So, thank you for watching this video. If you like what you saw, then don't forget to hit the subscribe button in order to receive more of our useful and interesting content. You can also comment your views in the description box in the comment section down below. In the description box, we'll be having lots of other links which provide you various other content, such as learner words, mind maps, NEET preparation, memory hacks, etc. We also provide very good stories for kids. So until the next webisode, take care, stay safe, bye-bye for now.